Welcome to this explainer. And right off the bat, we must explicitly state that this explainer is provided by the English Lit on YouTube. Think of me as your professor for the next few minutes because we're about to outline an absolute intellectual earthquake. We're going to unpack the incredibly complex theories of post-structuralism and deconstruction. Theories that act as the ultimate disruptors of stable meaning and have fundamentally shaped contemporary cultural studies. So, if you've ever wondered how our whole approach to analyzing society shifted so radically in the late 20th century, well, you're in exactly the right place. This quote right here perfectly captures the whole vibe of what we're talking about today. Meaning is sliding, abyssal, undecidable. Emerging as a theoretical vanguard from 1960s and 70s France, post-structuralism was pushed forward by these literary intellectuals and philosophers who were looking at earlier structuralist ideas and saying, no, that's too rigid. They proposed a really radical argument that the very language we use every single day fundamentally resists absolute truth. It resists any sort of fixed reality. Meaning doesn't just sit still for us, it literally slips through our fingers. Okay, here is our syllabus for today. First, we'll cover the mechanics of meaning. Second, textual rhetoricity and intertextuality. Third, the tool of deconstruction. And finally, number 4, the impact on cultural studies. Let's dive right in. Section 1, the mechanics of meaning, or how language inherently undermines itself. So here's the foundational breakdown. Post-structuralism really problematizes how language refers to things. It argues that the signifier, which is just the word itself, is completely disconnected from both the signified, the concept in your head, and the referent, which is the actual physical thing out there in the world. Because these three elements are uncoupled, language just kind of floats in relation to reality. Think about the word apple versus the actual crunchy fruit. Words become what theorists call floating signifiers. You might think you're pinning down reality with a word, but the word is really just sliding right over the surface of it. Moving on to Section 2, textual rhetoricity and intertextuality. This is where we start adding layers of difference. Okay, so if floating signifiers weren't destabilizing enough, figurative language comes in and makes this disconnect even more chaotic. When you introduce metaphors or metonymies, you create what's termed textual rhetoricity. Basically, you're piling on layers of substitutions. It's no longer just a word failing to perfectly capture a physical object. Now it's a word acting as a substitute for another word. This just widens the gap between language and actual reality even further. Furthermore, no text exists in a vacuum. Every single text out there, whether it knows it or not, is constantly borrowing from a massive historical archive of previous culture. This unavoidable condition is known as intertextuality. A text is inescapably dependent on prior words, conventions, connotations, and even unconscious practices. So when you're reading a sentence, you aren't just reading those specific words on the page. You are navigating this vast, differential web of previous cultural codes. So the really crucial point here is that this specific combination, floating signifiers, rhetoricity, and intertextuality, leads to a concept known as dissemination. Now, in older literary critiques, a text might just be considered ambiguous, right? Like, oh, it has a couple of meanings. But dissemination takes it way further. Textual meaning is sliding, abyssal, and entirely undecidable. The very linguistic properties of language completely destroy any hope you might have for a single, stable interpretation. And this structural undecidability triggers a super famous theoretical claim, the death of the author. Now, as your professor, I have to warn you, this is where things get truly controversial. Because meaning is entirely shaped by this vast network of sliding words and historical intertextuality, the text itself becomes completely disconnected from whatever the author's original intention or psychology was. The author doesn't control the meaning anymore, the language does. And because of this, deconstructive readings usually focus on being compelling or useful for us now, rather than claiming to find the absolute truth of what the author originally meant. All right, Section 3, the tool of deconstruction. Let's look at the actual analytic procedure. To really understand the tool, we have to understand its roots, the concept of ontological difference, or what is famously termed différance, spelled with an A. This idea states that simply because entities exist in space and time, they are naturally and inherently differentiated and divided. The source material gives a great, really simple example. Every single bluebird is inherently singular. Nothing is identical. Everything is defined by its differences. The philosopher Jacques Derrida took this philosophy of difference and transformed it into a practical two-step methodological instrument to actually dismantle philosophical hierarchies. Doing a deconstruction works like this. Step 1. You locate a traditional philosophical binary, find its moment of maximum instability, and you invert it. Step 2. You destabilize and reinscribe the concepts, completely transforming how their historical and hierarchical relations are normally understood. Let's look at how this inversion works in practice with the classic binary of nature versus culture. Traditionally, we think of nature as coming first, right? It's primary. And culture is something that comes later. It's secondary. But to deconstruct this, you show how the belated second term, culture, is actually indispensable. It is constitutively prior. Think about it. It is only from the vantage point of culture, using cultural language and frameworks, that the concept of nature is even named and defined in the first place. Boom, you've completely inverted the hierarchy. And this brilliantly illustrates Derrida's most famous application, the speech versus writing binary. Historically, Western philosophy privileged speech as the spontaneous, face-to-face truth, while viewing writing as just a secondary, dead copy of speech. Derrida inverted this to prove that the concept of writing, which he expanded to mean any form of differential inscription, actually precedes and makes speech possible. He completely undercut the assumed superiority of spontaneous conversation. Finally, Section 4, Impact on Cultural Studies. Moving from words to society. So, how does this incredibly dense linguistic methodology actually shape the society we live in? Well, the transition happens when leftist-oriented poststructuralism takes these abstract concepts of linguistic difference and maps them directly onto sociopolitical differences. The core idea that meaning is defined by difference rather than sameness gets expanded. It's used to analyze class, gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, and nationality. This multifaceted term, difference, becomes the primary lens through which society itself is read as a kind of social text. By focusing on desire, the body, and subjectivity, rather than just strict text on a page, poststructuralism laid the groundwork for entirely new analytical movements. The problems of subject formation and identity link poststructuralism directly to feminist theory. Think of concepts like écriture féminine, as well as queer theory, postcolonial criticism, and the critical study of pop culture and minority literatures. Basically, it provided the intellectual tools needed to dismantle traditional hegemonic narratives. Now, while some opponents out there view certain strands of deconstruction as narrowly formalistic or completely apolitical, its political branch is deeply engaged with analyzing power. It merges with Marxism and postmodern social activism, including feminist, lesbian, gay, and ethnic rights movements, to analyze the dynamics of hegemonic institutions. This complex fusion of approaches is arguably a leading trait of our entire postmodern culture, producing highly original criticism by just constantly questioning established norms. As we conclude this explainer, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. We've seen how intertextuality, floating signifiers, and difference completely dismantle the idea of absolute truth in a text. But if the very language we use constantly undermines stable meaning, how can you be sure you are accurately reading your own reality? It's definitely something for you to ponder the next time you interpret a book, a conversation, or the world itself. Class dismissed. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive into the theory of difference.